There is a strange paradox in the human mind. You can receive 1,000 compliments, 1,000 words of praise that lift you up. But it takes only one insult, one critical comment, or one look of disapproval to drag you down into the mud. Why does the negative weigh so much more than the positive? Why do we give our keys to happiness to the very people who want to lock us away? If you have ever laid awake at night, replaying a criticism over and over in your mind, wondering why you aren't good enough, this story is for you. In the bustling city of Viridia, there lived a master architect named Thomas. Thomas was a genius of his time. He could sketch cathedrals that seemed to touch the heavens and design bridges that looked as light as spiderwebs. He was wealthy, respected, and sought after by kings and queens. But Thomas lived in a private hell. Despite his genius, he was made of glass. If a client praised a building but suggested the windows were slightly too narrow, Thomas would spiral into a depression for days. If a passerby made a rude comment about the color of his tunic, Thomas would feel a burning shame in his chest. He was a master of building strong foundations for others, but he had no foundation within himself. He was a leaf blowing in the wind of other people's opinions. One summer, Thomas unveiled his masterpiece. The Grand Library, the entire city gathered, thousands cheered. But as the applause died down, Thomas heard one voice in the front row, a rival architect, whisper to a friend, "It is impressive, yes, but the archway is derivative. It lacks soul." That one whisper deafened the roar of the thousands who cheered. Thomas went home that night and stared at his drafting table, convinced he was a fraud. The joy of his creation turned to ash in his mouth. He could not sleep. The criticism was like a hook in his flesh, and every time he thought about it, he pulled the rope tighter. Desperate for peace, Thomas fled the city. He traveled to the jagged edge of the continent, seeking the one man rumored to have a mind like a still lake. An old, blind stone carver named Elias. Elias lived in a simple hut, perched on a cliffside, overlooking a violent, churning sea. He spent his days carving intricate statues from the driftwood that washed ashore. He was not famous, he was not rich, but he radiated a calm that Thomas could feel from 10 paces away. Thomas approached the old man, who was sanding a piece of wood with his calloused hands. "Master Elias," Thomas said, his voice trembling, "I have everything a man could want. Wealth, fame, talent. But I am a slave. A single word from a stranger can destroy my week. How do I stop the words of others from hurting me? How do I build a wall to keep them out?" Elias didn't stop sanding. He tilted his head toward the sound of the ocean below. "You are an architect, Thomas. You build walls to keep things out. But the heart is not a house. If you build a wall around your heart, you keep the sunlight out too." "Then what must I do?" Thomas pleaded. "I am tired of bleeding every time someone speaks." Elias stood up. "Come with me." The old man led Thomas down a steep path to the beach. The wind was howling, and the grey waves were smashing against the massive black rocks of the coastline with a deafening roar. "Look at the cliff!" Elias shouted over the wind. "The ocean has been screaming at this cliff for 1,000 years. It throws its weight against it. It spits salt and foam. It tries to break it down every single second of every single day. Does the cliff scream back?" Thomas looked at the towering black rock. "No." "Does the cliff try to change its shape to please the ocean?" Elias asked. "No," Thomas replied. "Does the cliff hide in a cave because the ocean is angry?" "No," Thomas said. "It just stands there." Elias smiled, his blind eyes looking toward the horizon. "The cliff does not suffer because the cliff knows what it is. It is stone. The opinion of the water does not change the reality of the stone." Elias reached down and picked up a handful of sand. He held it out to Thomas. "You, my friend, are trying to be a bucket catching the rain. You try to catch every opinion, every word, and hold it. And because you hold it, it becomes heavy. You must become the cliff, or better yet, become the mist." "The mist?" Thomas asked, confused. "Imagine an archer shoots an arrow at a rock," Elias said. "The arrow might chip the rock. Now, imagine an archer shoots an arrow at the mist. What happens?" "The arrow passes right through," Thomas whispered. "It leaves no mark." "Precisely," Elias said softly. "Criticism is only an arrow if you become a solid target. You make yourself a target when you defend yourself. When you argue back, when you justify, when you say, 'I am not that,' you are solidifying your ego. You are saying, I am here, hit me. But if you realize that the criticism is not about you, but about the person speaking it, you become like mist. Elias placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. The man who called your work soulless, he was speaking of the emptiness in his own soul, not yours. He was painting his internal world onto your external canvas. Why did you accept the painting? Thomas stood by the ocean for a long time. He realized that for years he had been accepting gifts he didn't want. Every insult was a package delivered to his door, and he had been signing for every single one, bringing them inside and unpacking them in his living room. He realized he didn't have to sign the receipt. Years later, Thomas returned to Viridia. He continued to build. He continued to create. When his next structure was unveiled, the critics were loud. Some loved it, some hated it. One critic wrote a scathing review in the city paper, calling Thomas an architect of the past. Thomas read the paper while sitting in his garden. A younger apprentice watched him, terrified of Thomas's reaction. Thomas simply smiled, folded the paper, and used it to light the fire for his tea. He didn't argue. He didn't defend. He didn't feel the hook in his flesh. He had realized that the words were just noise, like the crashing waves against the cliff. He knew who he was, and that was enough. The story of Thomas and Elias teaches us a vital lesson for our modern lives. We live in a world of constant feedback, social media, comments, office politics. Everyone has an opinion. If you try to manage everyone's perception of you, you will exhaust yourself. You will become a hollow shell, shaped by the hammering of others. True peace does not come from silencing the critics. It comes from realizing that their words define them, not you. When you know your own value, criticism is no longer an attack. It is just information. You can use it if it's useful, and discard it if it's not. Be the cliff that stands firm, or be the mist that lets the arrow pass through. But never ever give a stranger the power to decide who you are.